Up next, Gordon and I take a look at the Canon EOS M5 on the Camera Labs Photography Podcast. Hi, this is Doug Kay. I'm here once again with Mr. Camera Labs himself, Gordon Lang. How are you today, Gordon?
I'm very good, Doug. How are you?
I'm doing very well.
I would, at this point in the show, I always like to, before we get started, I'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone who supports Camera Labs and the podcast. Without your help, we couldn't do it. So whether you're buying us a coffee, or shopping at Amazon or B&H Radarama through the affiliate links, either below if you're watching on YouTube or at cameralabs.com, then you are really helping us put this show together because we don't get any money in any other way. So this is what keeps the lights on, the doors closed or open, or however you want to word it. Thank you very, very much. And thanks also for your comments. It's really helpful to hear what you think. Oh, and just in case you're curious, this big thing in front of me, which is blocking my wonderful Camera Labs t-shirt, is a Rode NT USB. It's a microphone which I was talking about a while ago that I was going to try and get hold of. So I've got it. The previous few podcasts were recorded with a Zoom H2N mic. So I'd be interested to hear which you think sounds better. And I'm going to have another Rode microphone because if anything, I'm the master of inconsistency. So I'd like to hear your views on which you sound best. Doug, you actually quite like the sound of this mic, don't you?
I do. I think you're going to get rave reviews. Who knew you could sound so good?
I know, and who would know that it would block my only money-generating thing? So instead of you looking at my Camera Labs t-shirt throughout this show, you can look at my brand new book behind me. I
was going to say, this is a new prop we have here. What is that?
Well, what is that behind me? We will talk about cameras in a minute, honestly. Okay. This is my new book, In Camera, which I've been working on for a couple of years. It's got 100 of my travel photos. They're all JPEGs, out of camera, no filters. Coincidentally, also all mirrorless cameras, and it's done like a kind of cookery book. So you've got the photos on one side and the recipe on the other side, like the EXIF data and stuff like that. So if you're interested in proving to people that you do not need to shoot RAW all the time, you do not need to shoot manual, then you need a copy of In Camera. And I promise to plug this on almost every show going forward.
Yeah, I'm looking.
It's in hardback. It's a proper book. It's in all good booksellers now. Do you know what? I'm even going to put a link to it in the description of this video, and then put it back up here for you to remind you.
And I'm looking forward to my personally autographed copy the next time we're together.
I'll definitely have one sent to you, Doug, and it would be my honor and pleasure to sign it from you. And if anyone lives in Brighton or nearby, you know where I drink my coffee. Come in and I'll sign it for you if you've got one.
And I think it's a brilliant idea because, here we are talking about the gear, and some of these cameras, well, all of the cameras these days are so sophisticated, but there is an absolute joy about going out and just shooting in JPEG. I'm going to admit that I've been known to shoot in full automatic even. And some of
There's no shame in it. There's no shame in it. Do you know, there is such snobbery in photography and in a lot of hobbies where people say, oh, you need to be able to, you need to know this or do it this way, otherwise you're not doing it properly. I say nonsense, try and get the composition right, get the lighting right and the timing right. That's what true photography is about. So what if you can balance an exposure? And half the people I know who shoot in manual, do you know what they do to know when they've got the right exposure? What they do is they adjust the exposure until the meter says 0 AV, which basically means they are going to dial in almost exactly the same exposure the camera would have done if it was in automatic. The whole point of shooting in manual is to override that and say, you know what, I know you think it should be this bright, but I'm going to do it this way. But this was what the book is kind of all about, is that, you don't need to feel bad about this, and you don't have to put up with, fairly average or boring results. You can get some really, really nice pictures, and it does teach you to kind of think more about what you're doing when you're taking the picture. Get it right. I don't like the attitude of, oh, I can fix it later. Why not fix it now? Get it right now. And then you've got a picture that you can share straight away. You don't need to do any work on it. And that's my philosophy anyway. So I hope you like it.
If somebody wants to purchase this book, how do they go about doing that?
Well, it's a proper book. It's not a self-published book. It's not a vanity project in any way. It's available in all good bookshops, and it's on Amazon.com, Koike, and all the others. And as I said, I'll put a link down there in the description. And believe me, cameralabs.com, the website, is going to be covered with adverts for this. And you will be supporting us if you buy a copy as well. That also helps us. It's, I think, £20 or $25 is the full retail price. But Amazon and those guys, they discount it straight away. It's probably 20p already.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I really am.
Thank you.
A long time in the making. So very good.
Yeah. A long time.
So, okay. Oh, look what you've got in your hand. This is the Canon EOS M5. And, even before the show, I was confused because there's an M5 and an M6, and you'll help us tell the difference. But I wanted to ask you right up front, I have a confession. I have never been a Canon shooter except for, the S120 and the little things like that. What is the EOS line? Where does the EOS line fit relative to the other things we think of, like the 1D, the 7D, the 5D, all those things? Where does this camera go?
Okay, well, this actually is a good opportunity to wish Canon and EOS a happy birthday, because EOS is 30 years old pretty much as we recorded this video. When you watch this video or listen to this podcast a year later, that statement will be completely meaningless. But 30 years ago, Canon introduced EOS, which is based around an electronic mount. Up until that point, there was the actual lens camera mountings were fairly unsophisticated. But they said, look, we're going to revamp this whole thing. So they came up with EOS. Originally developed for 35mm film SLRs, but then later adopted by digital SLRs, and in the case of their M5, in their mirrorless range. So EOS from Canon is basically all of their interchangeable lens cameras, be they film SLRs, digital SLRs, mirrorless. I think maybe even I think the cinema cameras which take the Canon lenses are also EOS cameras as well. So that's what EOS is. So it's different from the PowerShot range, the Ixuses and the Elfs. That's their point and shoots. The EOSs are the interchangeable lens cameras. So the EOS range is obviously top. The flagship is the 1DX Mark II. The most affordable ones are the the basic Rebel. I think a T5 is the cheapest one at the moment, which outside the US it's called the 1300D. There's a lot of models in between. And in fact, in Canon's mirrorless range, it already has, this was the fifth. But don't assume that the models before this were the EOS M1, M2, M3, M4, and M5. That would be far too easy. Because, of course, they're pitched at different levels, and Canon kind of tries to number it like that. Like the EOS M10 is one of the most basic ones. The EOS M5 is the most sophisticated so far. There is an EOS M3, which fits in differently. And there's now also an EOS M6, which is pitched slightly lower, so it is terribly confusing. But that's why we're here. The most important thing to note is the EOS M5, which I have in my hand right now, is the top-end Canon mirrorless camera, and also the first and still the only mirrorless camera from Canon that has a built-in electronic viewfinder, because the M6, which came out after this model, is basically a kind of like a viewfinder-less version of it. And to help you understand this camera a bit better as well, another way you can look at it is very similar to the EOS 80D digital SLR without the mirror and without the optical viewfinder. So it's like a mirrorless version of that. There are differences between those two, but there's an awful lot of similarities. So has that cleared up any of it at all?
Somewhat, but I'm looking at my notes and I realize I've made all these notes about the wrong camera. I'm looking at the EOS M6, so we're going to have a lot of fun with this. Why don't you start?
Well, they've got a lot in common.
Yeah, start right in with the basics. Tell us what the camera has going for it.
Well, before that, I'm going to throw that right back at you, Doug, and say how much is one of these cameras going to cost? An EOS M5.
All right. In the US, it's just a touch under $1,000, $979 for an EOS M5.
And is that body alone or in a kit?
That's body only.
Okay. So the M6.
The M6, you get one more. You get a 6 instead of a 5, but you save $200. It's only $779.
Yeah, but you don't get the electronic viewfinder, and the screen articulation is a bit different. Now let's look at the competition. So this $1,000 comfortably puts it in a mid-range category. So it's going to be a comfortable step up from the most affordable budget models without the complexity and weight and price of the top end ones. So let's compare it, say, against, I think Sony's Alpha A6300 is a key rival for this. How much is that model? That
camera is just $100 less expensive, $898 in the US, body only today. Prices are somewhat flexible.
Yeah, that's going to be a big rival for the EOS M5, definitely. We've also got from Panasonic a very compelling camera that we've also reviewed before, which is the Lumix G85 in America, which we call the G80. unless you're in Germany, in which case this is G81, just to make things really confusing. How much are you looking at for one of those?
That's essentially the same price as the Sony Alpha 6300, $897. So again, $100 less expensive than this one.
Okay, and also another mid-range mirrorless camera, brand new one, which we've not reviewed yet. I've previewed it, played with it. It's the Fujifilm X-T20, which is like a more affordable version of the X-T2. How much is an X-T20? And
again, right in that same ballpark, $100 less expensive than the EOS M5.
Right, so the M5 is the most expensive out of that group.
Yeah, the only difference is you mentioned the Canon 80D as being similar. You get that mirror if you want it, but you spend an extra $100. So that comes in just $100 more than this camera.
Okay, that's very interesting. Very, very interesting. Now, the thing that really differentiates these cameras, the thing that springs to mind most of all, is that the Sony, the Fujifilm, and the Panasonic will all film 4K UHD. And some of them will do high frame rate 1080 as well, whereas Canon is still stuck in 1080 land on a product like this. It wants you to spend more. It wants you to buy a 5D Mark IV if you want 4K. So right now it's looking slightly uncompetitive because all of those rivals will shoot 4K, whereas the Canon won't. But otherwise, they all share quite a few things in common. They all have got fantastic image quality out of the box. Let's see. They all have touch screens apart from the Sony. If you want the touchscreen on the Sony, you need to get the A6500. They have varying degrees of stabilization. Panasonic has it built into the body and does it really, really well. None of those others have it built into the body. So there's various differences, but 4K is the one that really kind of stood out for me as one of the major differences. But let's not focus on that yet. That's something we can have a go about later.
Let's talk about the sensor first.
Yeah, so the EOS M5 has a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor, and it has dual pixel CMOS AF. Now, this is the first, believe it or not, this is the first Canon mirrorless camera to have dual pixel CMOS AF, and the first one with an electronic viewfinder. And these two features really should have been there at day one. Now, I've certainly got nothing against cameras without electronic viewfinders. Have them in the range, offer them at a cheaper price, but make sure you have one with a viewfinder in the range as well, because people like me are going to whinge about it. People, they do like an EVF option. I can't believe it's taken them until late 2015, which is when this camera was announced, to produce a mirrorless camera with a viewfinder. And also, when the 70D DSLR came out, they came up with this unbelievable sensor technology called dual pixel CMOS AF. And what that lets you do, it's so smart. As you know, if you're a regular visitor to Camera Labs or listener of the podcast or watcher of the video, there's two main ways to perform autofocus. There's contrast-based autofocus and there's phase detect. I say phase like that so that you don't think I'm saying face, like the thing on the front of my head. They're two different things. Phase detection and face detection is terribly confusing. The great thing about phase detection is it knows what direction it needs to focus in. It knows when to start, it knows when to stop. There's none of this hunting back and forth. It is the holy grail of autofocus. However, if you want it on a mirrorless camera, it needs to basically be embedded somewhere in the sensor, unless you try and cheat some of the light away with a little mirror or a big mirror and get it out of the way. So you need it embedded on the sensor. You need to devote some of those pixels permanently to autofocus duties, and some people like doing that, some people don't. Some people do different amounts. Canon, however, came up with something completely unique and completely new with dual pixel CMOS AF. It said, you know what, if we actually divide each pixel into two, we can use each one of those as a phase detect AF point, but then switch it back into an imaging pixel when we want to take the picture, and then switch it back into an autofocus pixels when we want to autofocus, and just keep switching between them really quickly. And in fact, we could use the entire sensor. None of this, just a little area in the middle or a largest area. We could use the entire sensor. Now, for some reason, they decided to just use 80% of the sensor, but that's pretty much all of it. And it just switches seamlessly between it. So there's none of this permanently devoting pixels to phase. I have to say it like that, to phase detect AF. They can just switch in between. So this is brilliant. They came up with it was like, wow, this is the technology. This is the most amazing technology ever. Put it in every camera from this point on. So what did they do? Nothing. It wasn't in any other camera for ages. Absolutely ages. And then their mirrorless cameras came out and it was like, wow, this a mirrorless camera with dual pixel cinema set, that would kill it. That would absolutely kill the market. Canon could take it and lead with it, but they didn't. They made us wait until the 5th model before they put it in. And it's already on several DSLRs now. It's on the 70D, the 80D, the 7D Mark II, the 5D Mark IV, and the 1DX Mark II, if I recall, just off the top of my head. But the first mirrorless one is the EOS M5. So why is it taking them so long to do this? But they've done it. And what it lets this camera do is focus very, very smoothly and confidently, whether you're shooting stills. But for me, where it all comes together is for video, because it just focuses continuously autofocuses so well in video, very confident, very smooth. It just finds the subject, focuses on it, and stops when it reaches it. And if the subject moves, it can keep tracking it. So if you're a vlogger or you're filming your kids or anything else, it's brilliant. And if you're into, because it has a touch screen as well, you can touch to pull focus between subjects. In fact, you know what, while I'm talking, because I'm going on for so long, we're going to put in a video here. Here's a video that I filmed pulling focus from near to far and back again. But the thing that makes this video particularly special is it was not filmed with one of the native EFM lenses, but it was filmed with a 50mm EF lens, the f1.2 lens. I'm going to show it now. I was going to save it for later on. There, look at that bit of glass on the front. F1.2, f1.2 lens with an adapter on the bottom of it that lets me put it on that camera. And even an old lens like this, and a very specialist DSLR lens with a massive aperture on it, even that focuses brilliantly when you've got it mounted on this camera. So that's what you saw in that video, me pulling focus. That was with the 50mm f1.2. And did you notice that when it reached the subject, it just stopped? It didn't hunt. It didn't go beyond it and come back. So that, I will have a go at Canon in many respects, but that's the kind of core of what makes this camera really great. So that's the sensor, 24 megapixel APS-C. Sorry, I went on for a bit there.
That's okay. No, it's great. Because, it's sort of interesting. If you look back, I'm guessing it's maybe 6 years, when the 5D first became one of the first cameras to be used in video. And it was used for it was used for professional video. And filmmakers were running out to buy the 5D Mark II. And Canon had that market to themselves. There was no DSLR, there was no mirrorless camera. You either used a professional video camera, or if you wanted something compact, because the 5D Mark II is smaller than the video cameras, that was the way you shoot. And it looked like Canon had a huge lead. And then the mirrorless guys came in, Panasonic in particular, because of their video background, and they sort of stole the video market. And Canon sort of let that go. So it's interesting to see that that they're back here when they finally put the dual pixel autofocus sensor in the M5, because you and I both loved it on the 70D. Yeah. And I'm pleased to say that it's also on the EOS M6. So maybe Canon's learned their lesson, because after all, if this was Sony and they had this tech, they would put it in everything from this point on, which they did with the A6000. That went into the A5100, and then they put it in the A6300, but made it even better, their continuous autofocus technology. So, which is what you should do. I mean, I do understand, those kind of meetings where you go, look, we've developed this really great tech and we're going to put it in the best model, but we can't put it in the cheaper one, the next one, because people are going to buy that instead. It's like, well, yeah, if you don't, someone else will, and they'll go and buy theirs instead, Don't care about cannibalizing your own range. Care about losing customers to other brands, to other systems, because that's happened a lot, especially with Canon. And when you've got technology like that, don't sit on it. Yeah, there could, of course, be more. I mean, it's easy for us journalists and presenters to talk about this stuff and, critique them. Maybe there's something behind the scenes we don't know about. Maybe it's fantastically complex and difficult and expensive to make. Maybe there's the factory that makes it is only open one day a month. I don't know. It's operated by cats or something. They only work on Tuesdays. Cats only work on Tuesdays. It's a fact. So, there could be other things. But I'm glad, relieved that finally they've got it in a mirrorless, and it is a joy to behold. But still no 4K. Still no 4K. So since we've gone straight into video, I think this is going to be a bit of a bunched up show. We're going to jump back and forth. It will film 1080 video up to 60p, so it doesn't even do like 100 or 120p 1080, and it will not do 4K. It is at least the full frame coverage. It doesn't scale it down. There is no flat profile. Sadly, there is a microphone input.
You know, so they giveth and they taketh away. Well, they don't take it away because that implieth that it was always present, which in this instance it iteth not.
So show us the body, the controls, and the LCD.
Yeah, well, this is as good a time as any to point out the lens. This is an 18 to 150 millimeter kit zoom, which is optionally available with it. It's quite long, as you can see. But this is a new kit zoom that's very long. Now, obviously, with an APS-C, if it was APS-C from anyone else, you'd multiply that by 1.5 times. Because it's Canon APS-C, it's 1.6 times. Just one of those little things. APS-C is not the same on all of these. I'm holding this body, and every time I pick up this body, I think, do you know what? It feels really nice. It feels very solid. Now, it is not weatherproof. They make no claims on that, but then no one does at this price point, really. But it does feel, it feels nice. I like it. I like holding this camera, and that's very important. We've talked about this before, that if you pick up a camera and you're like, well, yeah, and then you touch the buttons, you're like, or even it's on the shelf and you're looking at it and you think, like that. A camera's cost call out to you. I'd say, please use me, shoot with me, take pictures, film video with me. And I like the look of this camera, and I like the way it feels. It feels good.
It looks like a DSLR. It looks like it would have a mirror in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's styled like a mini DSLR, but I mean, look how thin it is. If you're watching the video, this camera is pretty slim. But as the top end model in their range, it has quite a lot of control. It's got a front finger dial where the shutter release is on the inside. It has a rear thumb dial, which also has a button on the top that lets you reconfigure that function. So 1 minute it could be doing this. Push the button, the next minute it's doing something else. Push the button, it returns to that function. It also has a dedicated exposure compensation dial. It has one of Canon's thumb wheels on the rear that also tilts as you touch it. So you can use that as the traditional cross keys. So there's plenty of control in it. The main mode dial on the top left. It does have a built-in pop-up flash, and it does have a hot shoe as well. Now, probably the most interesting thing about this body is the screen. Now, the screen is 3.2 inches, first of all, which is a little bit bigger than most digital camera screens. 3.2 is still a bit of a treat. Most of them are 3 inches, so 3.2 is nice. It will angle up, as you would expect, by 90 degrees. This is for shooting at lower angles, maybe, from the waist or a table. And it will angle down. Now, I'm going to angle it down to, the usual 45 degrees or so, but it goes further. It'll tilt down and down and down and down, and well, look at that. This screen actually tilts down by 180 degrees to face the subject, so you can do your selfies or your pieces to camera. However, and you know what, Doug? I'm going to point it at you. There you see. Maybe not. Can't quite see you there. I'm being careful not to show my notes there where I go. I can't believe Canon's done this again. I might have something libelous there, so I'm going to switch it off.
There I am. I saw myself.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
Now, do you see the obvious flaw in having a screen that folds down below the camera?
Well,
now, bearing in mind you might be doing self-portraits with it.
Yeah, the lens is going to block it to some extent.
Well, yeah, but perhaps more obviously, the tripod mount is going to block it somewhat. Or even if you have it resting on it, you can't rest this camera
on the table. That's a good point. That's right. That's right.
You can't rest this on the table. You can't rest it on a ledge. You can't put it on a tripod unless it's got the world's strangest, thinnest head on it. So unfortunately, and even if you did, it would be in front of it, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, it's very frustrating, because if you're a vlogger or just someone, just someone who films, well, that is a vlogger, isn't it? There's a few things that you want. There's the holy trinity, I think, are having a microphone input, so you've got decent quality audio, having a screen that faces towards you so you can actually see what you're doing, and third, a really, really reliable continuous autofocus system. Now, this camera actually has all three of those. This could be the perfect vlogger's camera, except they would have to be handheld vloggers, because the instant they put this down, they basically lose the ability to see what that screen is showing.
And I think that's the first time I've seen that. I've never seen a screen that would, face forward, but it went down instead of up. Or
I think Nikon
up.
did one.
Did they? Yeah, because it would.
Yeah, Nikon did one on the DSLR ages ago, I think.
Yeah, if they don't have the fake DSLR hump, if they put the EVF off to the side, or of course if they don't have an EVF at all, then they might flip up, or they'll articulate out to the side, and you'll get the whole thing out to one side or the other.
So here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. So they didn't do it side hinged because that would make the body thicker. They didn't flip it over the top because the viewfinder's in the way. So that then brings us to the newer EOS M6. Now, of course, vloggers aren't using that viewfinder. Let's get rid of it, make it cheaper. And yes, the screen flips up to face the subject. Brilliant. Does that solve all the problems? It does, unless you're mounting a microphone on the hot shoe, which again, many people do. So you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. I mean, if you have a lapel-based microphone or a separate one, then you get around that. But there's still no perfect vlogger's camera. But I did want to show you that screen. Now, it is touch sensitive, and Canon's touch screen interface is arguably one of the best around. I think Panasonic's is also extremely good. They're good in different ways. The thing I like about the Canon one is that they don't shy away from letting you operate the full menu system by touch. A lot of them go, we'll let you move the AF area by touch and swipe through images, but we're not going to let you tap through those menu options. That would be ridiculous. But Canon does, and you know what? It works really well. You can completely operate this by touch if you want, or use the physical controls that are on it. You can also compose through the viewfinder and use the screen to reposition the AF area like a touchpad if you want, or you could turn that off if the nose is bothering you, or reconfigure the area. Or you could train your nose, as indeed I have, to adjust the AF area. Let's just like this. It does actually work. It looks comical, but I have done that before. I've thought, shall I use my finger? I thought, no, I'm going to use my nose. Oh, look, it really works. So you can do that. I mean, have you used the Canon touchscreen? You don't use Canon cameras, Doug.
I have managed to avoid it for most of my career.
Is that been a deliberate move?
Well, back in the days when it was only Canon and Nikon, I was a Nikon user.
Never the twain shall meet.
No, well, I have, I've reviewed a lot of the Canon cameras, the larger ones, and I got to tell you, that little row of buttons.
Yeah,
the little row of buttons up drives me crazy. I can never figure out what those things do. But anyway, that's another story. That's another show completely.
Well, do you know what? When we talk about the Lumix GH5, we can talk about that because it has a similar row of buttons along the top, and it reminds me a lot of the Canon DSLRs. If those are the ones you're talking about. Anyway, that's another story.
Whole other thing. But I want to mention one thing. You say that the EOS M6 is a similar camera without the EVF. Might be better for some vloggers or other people shooting video. I should also point out that you can purchase an EVF for $210 US that will fit into the hot shoe. So you can get the EVF back and still spend roughly the same amount of money. Now, if you do that, if you went for the M6 with the viewfinder, do you have a comparable camera to this one?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I would refer you back to my review at cameralabs.com, where I will have, subsequently having spoken to Doug on this podcast, God, I wonder if he was right. I wonder how similar it is. I better find out because that's a really interesting question. So check out my review because there may be some weird little feature that's not consistent on them. But do you know what? I think they would be very, very, very similar. They have an extremely similar feature set. The interesting thing is, every time Canon introduces a new camera that appears to have the same specification, say sensor, as an earlier one, the first question you ask is it the same sensor as the whatever? And they always say, oh, no. So it's similar. It's not the same sensor. It's similar, but it's not the same sensor. How's it different? Oh, we don't know. We can't tell you. Or they haven't told us yet. You're like, well, I find that very dissatisfying as a journalist. If it is different, I want to know how. Is it reading the data off faster? Some of them, I have to say that just because a sensor is the same size and has the same number of megapixels, it does not make it the same sensor. A lot of them have got different data readout speeds that allow them to support, say, higher video frame rates or higher video resolutions, faster frames per second, that sort of thing. So they can differ in quite subtle ways. Maybe the dual pixel CMOS F is a bit different, but to be honest, I think it has to be the M6 has to have pretty much the same sensor as the M5, and it's probably the same sensor as the EOS 80D. Prove me wrong. Right. I'd like to be proven wrong. I want to know what the difference is, but they're very similar. And as you would expect, the live view experience, which is what you have full time on a mirrorless camera, is very similar on the M5 and the M6 as you would get on the 80D when you put it in live view. In fact, I want to move on to that and talk about continuous autofocus, because this camera will shoot at 7 frames per second with continuous autofocus. And when I tested it, again, it performed a lot like the 80D did, surprise, surprise. It's, to me, if the subject is going very quickly, like a cyclist or, you know, a sports player really belting it towards you, even a kid or a dog running very quickly, then it didn't, to me, feel quite as confident as, say, the Sony a6300. But when things are moving more leisurely, like, you know, at a fast walking pace or slower, then it works fine. It does successfully autofocus very, very well. It's just that I think for very fast sports, Sony still got the edge there on the autofocus, and of course does 4K video as well. I should also say the light levels that it focuses down to a -1 EV, which is not very dim. Panasonic are down to -4 EV on models like the G85 and the GH4. And, you know, I was shooting side by side with both of those cameras the other evening, doing some long exposure stuff, and the Panasonic kept focusing at times when, I mean, it was dark. It was pretty dark, but I could still autofocus on the Panasonic, whereas I had to go into manual focus on the Canon. You really notice it in situations like that. So, you know, it's not... Focusing is supposed to be its highlight, it's supposed to be its strength, but in some areas it's not so strong.
So it's interesting. So, you know, we've got some serious competition for this camera. You know, we mentioned the 80D, you know, if you'd rather have a DSLR. The Sony A63...
Which is more confident as well when you're doing the continuous AF. That's the thing about the 80D. You can switch over to the optical viewfinder, and its AF system in that is faster, so better for action. And
that has, as I remember, phase detect, but it uses the traditional separate sensor, right?
Yeah, it's a DSLR, the 80D, so it has a traditional phase detect sensor that's kind of hidden away in the optical viewfinder. So when you're composing with the optical viewfinder, it'll do very far. And now it's a smaller area, and it won't deploy some of the other technologies you get in live view. But it's nice to be able to switch between them. And I know this is coming from Mr. Mirrorless. I love mirrorless cameras and all the rest of it, but it is, when you do buy a modern DSLR, you do have that flexibility of switching between them, which in this instance is quite nice, because in some cases the 80D through the viewfinder is going to focus better than the M5 can when it's relying basically on its sensor alone.
So we're up against the Sony Alpha 6300, the Lumix G85, the Fuji X-T20. I mean, these are all excellent cameras. Would you say that the difference really then becomes to a choice of systems, a choice of ecosystems, and what family of gear you want to buy into? Because they're all interchangeable lens cameras here.
Yeah, it's very good that you came to that point, because you do have to consider the system as a whole. Now, when Canon launched EOS M, it was just about the last one to the mirrorless party, and it did not come out with a wealth of lenses straight away, and it's not come out with many more since. Believe it or not, there are only 7 native EFM lenses, which is not many at all, and a lot of them are zooms. Believe it or not, there are only 2 prime lenses in that lineup, and neither of them are particularly, you know, super bright portrait lenses. Sadly, there's the original 22mm f2, so that's like a 35mm equivalent. So it's a nice sort of street general purpose lens, but it's not going to be throwing the backgrounds of portraits out of focus anytime soon. There's a 28mm f3.5 macro lens, which is quite new. Actually, I want to show you that, because while I'm having a go at Canon and slagging them off, I'm now going to show you actually one of the things that's pretty cool. So this is the 28mm f3.5 macro lens. Looks sort of fairly normal. You need to kind of expand it before you can use it. The interesting thing is this bit at the end, which looks perfectly normal at this point, but it unscrews. So you unscrew this big ring at the end, and wait a minute, what is this?
Oh,
there is what looks like some sort of ring light, and if I press this button, look at that. Now, if you're watching the video, look at that. It's actually got a built-in ring light, a macro lens with a built-in ring light. That is cool. That is very, very cool. And you can change the brightness of it as well, pushing this button on the side. In fact, I think you can even make one side go off. Yeah, look at that.
We should point out that it's continuous light, not strobe.
Yes.
Right.
I think that's really neat. I've not seen that before, built in to a macro lens, although bizarrely hidden behind this. When I first got this lens in for test, I thought, this is the one with the ring light built in, and I was thinking, where is it? I can't see it. I can see the on-off button for it, but I couldn't see where the actual thing is. So you need to unscrew this thing on the front. So that's neat. So, you know, they've done quite a cool thing here. But where's the the 85 mil equivalent bright aperture portrait lens? That's what I want to see. You know, where's there anything else? There's hardly anything in the system. And Canon would say, wait a minute there. Hold it there. We don't need this massive EFM native lens catalog, because if you get one of these, this fella here, this is the EF to EFM adapter, and this lets you mount any EF lens, of which there are, I don't know, about 90 in the current range and more that have been discontinued. I mean, if you think that the 50mm f1.2 I have here is exotic and sexy, lest we forget, they used to do a 50mm f1.0 in an EF mount, an EOS lens. Mm-hmm. But you could put this on and have autofocus. And in fact, if you're filming movies, there's a cropped stabilization mode in it as well, which will also work with lenses like this, not for stills, just for movies and with a crop. But that's really nice, and it will autofocus them pretty well. But look at the size of this thing. This is a full frame lens. This is a big, heavy lens. And what I want now, if Canon have a full frame mirrorless camera, great, bring it on. We've got this massive range of full frame lenses, but it's not. It's an APS-C mirrorless camera. So I want APS-C lenses. I want smaller, lighter lenses, and also smaller because they don't need this great big adapter in the way. So, you know, they use this adapter as an excuse for having this modest EFM catalog. But, you know, and it is great that you can adapt all the EF lenses, but there's compromises. They're bigger, they're heavier if they're full frame lenses. I mean, you could adapt EFS lenses, which are obviously they're ones for their APS-C DSLRs, but there's not a lot of point because there's no sexy lenses in that lineup either. None of them are weather sealed. There's only one that's remotely really exciting, the 17-55 2.8, you know, one that's actually really bright and exciting. The rest of them are like just average zooms, really. Well, yeah, you know, I can't get excited by the system, and even if you can adapt it. And I should point out that if you buy a Metabone Smart Adapter 4 or more recent, you can also autofocus and mount any Canon EF lens on a Sony camera and have 4K video. Do you know what I mean? The ability to adapt and autofocus Canon lenses is not exclusive to the Canon system, which is the big kind of failing of this argument. You know, the argument that works for Canon also works for Sony. So it's a bit dodgy, you know. And then Sony and Fuji, and especially Panasonic and Olympus with Micro Four Thirds, they've got big native lens catalogs, lots of options, small, light, affordable, some not so affordable. You've got a lot of choice. So that, for me, is one of the big problems with EFM. Of course, if you're an existing Canon DSLR owner with a ton of EF lenses, then it becomes quite compelling. Although, again, you could go with Sony instead. So that, to me...
Well, let me ask you this. All right, so that adapter, I just checked, $200 in the US. Okay. So if I'm a Canon shooter and I'm using DSLRs and I have some collection of lenses for that, what do I gain by taking those lenses with the adapter and going with the EOS M5 or EOS M6? I mean, is there something in there that I'm getting that I'm not getting with my DSLR cameras?
It depends which DSLR you've got. If you have got a DSLR with dual pixel CMOS AF, like the 70D or the 80D, the 5D Mark IV, then no, you're not really gaining much. You've got this smaller body, a tilting screen, which not all the DSLRs have, but not a great deal of difference. But if you've got one of the DSLRs without dual pixel CMOS AF, then what you gain is the ability to autofocus in movies. Basically, that's the main thing that you get with it.
Because you and I and all the reviewers out there have been waiting for years for Canon and Nikon to come out with mirrorless cameras. We say, guys, you've got this great stable of lenses. You're letting Sony, Lumix, Fuji, Olympus basically steal this market from you. What are you waiting for? So the question is, are these cameras the answer to that? And I get the impression they're not.
Well, they are and they're not. I mean, they will, with the adapter, use any Canon lens. You can put any Canon EF lens on them and enjoy autofocus, which is great. The stabilization, if the lens has it, works. You can use it in movies. You know, you can pull focus really smoothly. They do all work. But because they're not native, they're they're bigger than they need to be. Even if they're full frame lenses, even if they did a full frame mirrorless, you've got that, that flange distance on a DSLR that's deeper, which you need to make up for with an adapter on a mirrorless. If you've got a native mirrorless lens, it doesn't need that. It becomes shorter a lot of the time, depending on the optical design and construction. It has the potential to be shorter. And obviously, if it's designed for a smaller sensor like APS-C, it has the potential to be smaller and lighter and cheaper as well. So just falling back, relying on this catalog that's designed for other systems, I don't want to adapt. I don't want to. I want something that's designed for it, that's designed for the job from the ground up. But you don't know what Canon's thinking. Maybe there is a full frame mirrorless waiting in the wings. Come on out, show yourself. It could be out there, but this, I'd love to hear from you. The Canon people will go, yeah, this is. It's great. I've got this big collection of Canon EF lenses and I can use them on a mirrorless camera now. Although, as we pointed out, it doesn't actually give you that many more advantages, especially if you've got one of the modern DSLRs with dual pixel CMOS AF. All you're basically getting is a slightly smaller body then with this big lens on the front. But equally, if you're used to Fuji's, for example, which stuck with APS-C, said, like, we're going to, or Micro Four Thirds, they said, look, this is our sensor size, so we're going to design for it. We're not going to have this legacy of trying to support older lenses or have compatibility with them. And it does make it difficult. It means you've got to come out of the gate with a new system and persuade people to buy it. And the way that you persuade people to buy it is you invest in it and you have a compelling lineup as quickly as possible. That's small, light, and high quality, and hopefully in some cases quite affordable as well. So there is different approaches to doing it. We could talk about this forever. I want to actually move on to there's one other feature I really want to mention that is Canon actually being quite forward thinking. The EOS M5 is the first Canon mirrorless to also feature Bluetooth as well as Wi-Fi. Now, we're seeing Bluetooth in more and more cameras these days, and the first time you hear about this, you might think, well, what's the point? Because Bluetooth is slower than Wi-Fi. If you're going to be transferring images, don't you want the fastest protocols and transmission systems as possible? Yes, that's true. But Bluetooth has other advantages in terms of being able to operate at a very low power and keep devices connected without much impact on battery life. And without you having to always kind of reconnect and go through that whole kind of negotiation process. So the trick is to not use Bluetooth for image transfer, but to use it for communication setup. So what Canon have done, and every manufacturer does this differently. Some of them use it for GPS transfer and all the rest of it. Canon doesn't do that here. What they use it for is to quickly initiate that Wi-Fi connection. So the camera could actually be in sleep mode. It could be in your bag, and you can wake it up over Bluetooth with your phone. Using the Canon Camera Connect app, you could just say, like, wake up camera, I want to transfer an image, and do it. And as soon as the Bluetooth would wake the camera up and would switch on its Wi-Fi and would help with the negotiation and the connection. And then once it is connected, then it switches over to the Wi-Fi, the faster speed to transfer the image, which is the perfect scenario, because it only uses Wi-Fi when it needs it, so it's not using up all your battery, but it uses the Bluetooth for the ease of use. And they've gone one step further, which is even better. The response time of Bluetooth, it may be slow, it may be a slow kind of data speed, but it can be very snappy in terms of that connection. So what they've done is they've developed this new app, or this new portion of the app, which is a very, very simple cable release. It just has a big button in the middle of your phone that lets you, take the picture. So what? I've seen this on so many cameras before on Wi-Fi, but normally what happens, if you've ever pressed the button on a remote Wi-Fi app, there is a perceptible pause. And the further you are away from it, the bigger that pause becomes quite perceptible. You're looking at a half second, maybe even a second delay. And that's fine for a bit of fun, but it's not acceptable if you're trying to capture an actual moment. It needs to be, I press the button, I want the picture to be taken like that. Well, with Bluetooth, you can do that. And now with the EOS M5 and the EOS M6, when you're controlling it with the app on the phone, over Bluetooth, it is immediate. It's brilliant. You literally tap the screen on your phone and the camera takes a picture immediately. There is no delay at all that I perceived. And that makes it a completely usable wireless cable release. I can't call it a cableless release, but it's like you've got a cable release because it's instant. There's no delay or compromise. So that is a really nice feature, and it's nice to see Canon. We do bash them in some technology respects, but that's a really nice feature, and it's also on the M6. So Bluetooth, very responsive for that.
Very good. All right. I think, we've managed to not only cover the M5 and the M6, but we've covered a lot of peripheral topics, which I think are pretty interesting, particularly to Canon shooters here. Gordon, I want to thank you for another great review. Again, encourage everybody to go to cameralabs.com to read Gordon's in-depth review of the Canon EOS M5. And if you're interested in purchasing this camera or any other camera or lens, please go to cameralabs.com and use the purchase links there. It helps us buy more and more coffee, which we tend to need. I think the older I get, the more coffee I need.
Well, I'm definitely not getting any younger, so maybe it's the coffee that's making us old.
And Gordon and I are in vastly different time zones, so no matter when we do the show, one of us is desperately in need of coffee. Also, of course, go to cameralabs.com and take a look at Gordon's new book, In Camera, which I think is going to be spectacular, and I am so looking forward to getting a copy of that.
It's absolutely fabulous. Look, there's the cover tells you everything you need to know. There's a mirrorless camera. That's an Olympus OM10 Mark II. That's my picture on the screen. That is what I'm taking out of camera. And there's Brighton's old West Pier just there. And I'm using a Lee filter system. I know I said no filter. I meant no digital filter. You're allowed to use physical filters because you're achieving the effect in camera, in the field where you're there. So yeah, anytime you buy us a coffee or shop at Amazon or buy the book or buy the t-shirt you can't even see, you are supporting our work, and we really, really do appreciate that. Doug, of course, also does photo workshops. He's particularly fond of places like Cuba. So go to dougk.com if you want to check out where his next workshop is. It's definitely worth looking at.
Okay, Gordon, with that, I'll say thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who's listening, viewing, and reading the website at cameralabs.com. So long. Bye-bye.